and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sunset TV. And in this episode, we are looking at a subject which has been in the news for some time. There is a lot of debate within the country on it, and there are expectations amongst the big arms suppliers overseas that they may just be able to bag the contract for at least 26 fighter jets that would be inducted sooner than later for India's newest aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant, which is being inducted and is currently using our earlier fleet of MiG-29s to carry out the trials and get itself battle ready. And we have two experts who will help us understand what is the delay and what are we looking at. We have with us Commodore Anil Singh, who is the president of the Indian Maritime Foundation, has been on our show on earlier occasions, so welcome once again.
Thank you.
And though you are a submariner, I believe you hold the Navy flag close to your chest, and therefore you will speak for the Navy. And we have with us the distinguished Vice Admiral Anil Chawla, who has just recently retired as Flag Officer Commanding-in-Chief of the Southern Naval Command, but more importantly for this subject has commanded an aircraft carrier and was very closely watching the final tightening of the screws on INS Vikrant before the Prime Minister made it seaborne formally. So welcome on the show.
Thank you.
And I'll start with you, Admiral Chawla. Why is it that we can't still make up our mind about the fighter aircraft that needs to be on an aircraft carrier, without which the aircraft carrier is really not serving its purpose?
Currently, it's a very interesting question, and it's not that simple an answer as well. Currently, as you brought out, we have the MiG-29Ks, which were procured in 2009 and which have now settled down on Vikramaditya, and indeed the Vikrant is also designed to operate the same kind of aircraft. The initial procurement of MiG-29Ks was about 45 aircraft. A few were bought later on to replace a few that had crashed or become unserviceable. But essentially, they were sufficient for the training versions, training squadron of the MiG-29Ks, which is based ashore in Goa, as also the squadron that flies from on board the Vikramaditya. Now, the plan was subsequently, once Vikrant was commissioned and has been commissioned now by the Prime Minister in September this year, to acquire new aircraft for this carrier, because the MiG-29Ks, by the time Vikrant came in and really got operational, would have already been close to 20 years old. In any case, they are a fourth generation aircraft. So to get a 4.5 or 5th generation aircraft, the plan was to look either in-house for an indigenous replacement, or in the absence of that, or because of delays in which, to then procure something to bridge the gap between the arrival of a truly indigenous carrier-borne aircraft and the older version of the aircraft that we have, that is MiG-29K.
Right.
So that was the plan. Now, of course, a lot depends on the design of the aircraft carrier as well, because essentially an aircraft carrier is designed, or ideally should be designed around a carrier-borne aircraft, because the heart of the carrier is the aircraft.
And we've done it the other way around.
In our case, we have had to design the carrier around the MiG-29K, because we really were not very sure. And it would have also operated the indigenous variant of the LCA Navy, but of course the LCA Navy was not really capable of operational exploitation beyond a very limited envelope. And so we treated it as a technology demonstrator for the next version, which of course we can speak of subsequently, which is going to come in. And therefore this delay in selection really is, to answer your question in brief, an issue between how soon we can induct an indigenous variant of the carrier-borne aircraft, and if we can't induct it, what should be the replacement?
Well, that's a very important point you make, because from what I've learned in the odd conversation with naval officers is that the two contenders on the face of it, the Rafale M version and the F-18 Hornet, both are desperate to get in. Both have made announcements that they are fully ready to be on board as far as India's aircraft carrier is concerned. But both have a limitation. Both are not fitting in size with the way that an aircraft should be placed before it goes down under the deck to be stored there. Now, not their fault, not the Navy's fault, because the design parameters were laid out and the design was fixed, sealed and signed and stamped. Bas, there will be no changes to it. So how do we deal with this challenge, Commodore Anil Jaising?
See, I think, and that's perhaps the reason why this foreign procurement of whichever was selected ultimately is being spoken of as an interim solution. It's not being spoken of as the solution. Till the, there's another indigenous development happening called the Twin Engine Deck-Based Fighter, TEDBF. Till that comes online, and they're saying it'll come online by 2032. But the fact remains that an interim solution doesn't mean that this aircraft will go away when that comes in. This will also continue to operate for the complete duration of its surface life. And you're right, I've also heard that there are issues with the stowage of the aircraft on board. And I'm sure the Navy must be looking at this very carefully to understand or maybe modify the design or work within the limitations that appear and then make the best choice possible for the aircraft. The other thing we've heard is that the Rafale twin-seater cannot operate from a carrier. It can only operate from a shore, whereas the Hornet twin-seater can also operate from a carrier. So that places another limitation on the number of aircraft that can actually operate from a carrier. But I think, I don't think any of us really qualified to understand what the Navy's actual requirements are. And I'm sure the Navy will make an informed decision on which of the two suits its long-term requirements, short-term requirements better, and requires minimum modification to any carrier, any modification on the carrier stroke the aircraft. So I think they will make a decision. I know the media is reporting that the Navy is showing more preference for the Hornet, for the Rafale, but I think that be that as it may.
Okay, so
we'll
Admiral
Chawla,
I was told by again some naval experts that because there is a whole logistics tail that has already come into place for the Rafale, and the last of the 36 that were agreed between Prime Minister Modi and the French government have come in. So that is another edge that the Rafale claims to have, while they have some limitations, as Commodore Jaising has brought out. And the Rafale is also arguing because the logistic tail exists, they are going to be able to give us the next fleet of aircraft cheaper. Now, when you go in for a big ticket purchase like an aircraft carrier, is like when you host the US president's visit to India. You don't look at cutting costs because these things don't happen every year. So what do you think, what's your gut feeling that what is it that is going to help us make a decision and make it fast? Because unless the Navy makes a decision, the political establishment is not going to make a decision.
I agree. I mean, the decision, as indeed with many other decisions, require to be expedited, and that's an area which we could discuss in a different program altogether. But right now, if you look at the advantages of Rafale versus the F-18, I think it is pretty much even Stevens because the Rafale does have disadvantages in terms of its stowage on board the carrier because its wings don't fold essentially.
Rafale's wings don't fold.
They don't fold.
Okay.
Second thing is that, as was brought up by Commodore AJ Singh, it is doesn't have a twin-seater version for the carrier, and therefore training indeed becomes an issue on board the carrier. However, it has a well-established logistics chain. The Air Force is already operating it with great success. Overall, it's an excellent aircraft. There's no doubt about that. So that is an inherent advantage that we have, that we already have. The Indian Air Force having a slightly different version of the aircraft, but there are many compatibilities, so it will help the logistics chain, it will help the training version ashore, etc., etc. On the other hand, when you look at the F-18, the Super Hornet, the F-18E and F, the E is the single-seater, the F is the twin-seater. Overall, when you match the sort of capabilities, it is indeed a slightly superior in terms of its performance, capability, weight carrying capability, range, etc., than the Rafale. So it does have that particular edge. And I understand that they've already demonstrated a method by which it could be taken down to the hangar. And indeed, because its wings fold, so it has that advantage as well. So therefore, now I think the decision will finally obviously rest with the authorities who are handling this issue in terms of the long-term vision. And therefore, in terms of the long-term vision, I think what we should be looking at really in the long term is the TED-BF, the twin-engine deck-based fighter, which is being designed by the Aeronautical Development Authority and going to be manufactured by the HAL. So if that is a long-term vision, what is it in terms of the current procurement that will help that long-term vision is, I think, what should drive ultimately the choice of the selection. And
well,
as far
you
as
you talk of long-term vision, thought crosses my mind. India has historically been chided the world over, and you've been a naval attaché in London, for having an ad hoc arsenal, that we pick up what suits us, what diplomatic leverage we can get out of each arms deals. There's a book to that effect also. And here, would it make a kind of another advantage to the F-18 that because there's so much of Rafale-centric interest already with the Air Force, why do we need to have all our fleets which are Rafale-centric?
I think it works both ways. I do agree that we have been buying in bits and pieces, but that was, I think, a constraint of being dependent on foreign arms imports. At a particular point in time, what was available, which met our cost requirements, our design requirements, our criteria. We have rarely done life cycle costing. We generally go by the L1 concept of the immediate item. Most of the big ticket items have not come through the procurement procedure. They've come through G2G arrangements, so there has been a political angle to them as well, which perhaps happens all over the world. So I think all those have been constraints. But personally, I think it is very important now for the kind of size and role that the Indian Navy is expected to play over the next few years to bring in standardization. We have to trim our logistics supply chain. Now, for example, if we're going to buy these 26 aircraft, and they're going to last us for the next 25 years or whatever number of years they're going to last us for, we'll have to create a completely new logistics supply chain for just 26 aircraft. Logistics, MRO, training, the works. So we have to now introduce standardization. Ideally, of course, we should have our own indigenous capability. Standardization is built into that. But if we are still dependent on importing, then this is an element which should have some sort of weightage in the selection matrix. That's my view, because, getting foreign support for foreign equipment costs an arm and a leg, frankly speaking.
And also, they enjoy strategic leverage. At the right time, they might just not deliver. Whoever it be, the French or the Americans or whatever. We faced that in the past.
Absolutely.
During the Kargil conflict and otherwise.
Absolutely.
Admiral, sir, I want you to explain to us, because you commanded the fleet at a place where the Navy wants the world to look at the world map from downwards, right? Not, we have historically looked at India's borders, northern borders, but Navy and Navy maritime experts always say, look at India's interest peninsula downwards and see how vast it is. Now, the vastness presents one big challenge amongst multiple. But one big challenge is the range that your aircraft carrier or your aircrafts can operate with. That can be compensated by drones. I'm told, correct me if I'm wrong, the Predator drones could be a model which could be on the aircraft carrier. So as far as the aircraft carrier can go, well, double that distance or more they can go, and you can even fire and forget them if required. Please explain, is this, how does the Navy look at it?
drones are indeed the future. We are seeing it in the Ukraine war itself, the extensive use. But then drones don't have an answer for everything as of now. So the drones that we have today, which are on lease from the Americans for surveillance purpose, for example, they of course have to operate from the shore because they require a very long landing strip, and they really cannot operate from or take off or land on a short strip that the aircraft carrier provides. But indeed, the drones have started operating from aircraft carriers, particularly the US aircraft carriers, where they have inducted the first drone for air-to-air refueling, which then extends the range of the human-manned aircraft considerably without having to keep another tanker with manned tanker operational from the aircraft carrier as well. So in the future, there is indeed the very concrete possibility that drones will start increasingly operating from carrier-borne as carrier-borne aircraft and gradually replace the manned aircraft. But right now, even the best technology that is currently available in the US has only gotten as far as making an air-to-air refueler. That of course can be fitted with the surveillance technology as well for long-range surveillance. That can also happen. But currently there are better means available from ashore, including satellites, etc., which can do that job better. So as far as the oceans are concerned, the aircraft carriers indeed are the answer to the wide open oceans, because it's only the aircraft carriers who can really provide you the capability to strike. And for example, if you have an aircraft like the Hornet or the Rafale, which goes close to 400 nautical miles, which is roughly roughly about 750 odd kilometers away from the aircraft, that extends the range of the carrier by that much in terms of striking power. Of course, surveillance is even more than that. So therefore, I think drones will play a part in the future, but it is a little bit far away as far as India is concerned. But if you see the global developments, the US indeed has been the first mover, and I'm sure we'll see China and the other countries also catching up in this, and India needs to move in this direction as well.
Okay, so now while we are at the subject of the aircraft carrier and connected with it, more importantly, the aircrafts which are really the punch of the aircraft carrier, there is a question that often does the rounds, is the whole debate about aircraft carrier versus submarines. And Commodore Jai Singh, you've been a submariner. You also are aware that submarines provide us that other important capability of second strike in the event of a nuclear confrontation. And also people would argue that submarines could be the real nemesis of an aircraft carrier group. Please explain.
I do agree with you that the submarine is a very potent platform. But again, I think that does not detract from the utility of an aircraft carrier or the requirement of an aircraft carrier. For a navy that is aiming to be a power projection blue water force with a large ocean area to cover, I mean, that is a call India has to take. The government should decide what kind of a power does it want India to be. If it really wants to be a global power and play with the big boys, then it has to have that capability. And I think it's only the aircraft carrier which provides that power projection. Now, coming to the vulnerability of the aircraft carrier that's often spoken of as the reason for not having them. I think any warfighting platform is vulnerable. An armored formation is vulnerable. An airbase on the forward areas is vulnerable. An aircraft carrier, in fact, the aircraft carrier is probably better defended than any of these other installations when it's at sea. And as the Admiral very clearly brought out, I think what we are now looking for is a carrier with greater strike capability. That means in a literal environment, one is of course the open ocean environment. When you refer to the map, if you turn the map upside down and you see into the peninsular India jutting into the ocean, you see the vast expanse of the ocean. Just the Indian Ocean, not the Indo-Pacific, just the Indian Ocean. And as the preeminent maritime power in the Indian Ocean, that responsibility to ensure the safety, security, rules-based order, etc., devolves upon us. So we have to be prepared for that. On the one hand, we're talking capacity building, Sagar, etc. So for that kind of role, if we want to play, we need to have that capability. The second thing I think which is very important as far as aircraft carrier goes, that everyone who talks about the redundancy, that the aircraft carrier is a redundant platform, I think is still trying to put the World War II template into a contemporary maritime battle space scenario and putting the aircraft carrier into that. The aircraft carrier will evolve. As the Admiral very clearly brought out, it's going to have drones in the future. The drone will be a very effective force multiplier. It will increase your range of operations. So the aircraft carrier will evolve in a network battle environment, which now covers hundreds of miles at sea. It's not just restricted to a few ships around each other. This can be a very, very potent command and control platform. So I think the aircraft carrier will evolve, as all military platforms do. And, let me put it across in a different way. China was always the one who were coming out with the carrier killer missile and, talking about the aircraft carriers finished. And that sparked the debate on how the American carriers or, super carriers are not going to be useless. But the same China is now going into aircraft carrier construction in a big way. Because they've realized that all this while they were very constrained by not having the blue water capability to pursue their aim of global dominance. They are not advantaged by a good maritime geography. They need open ocean spaces like the Indian Ocean to access the Atlantic, and so they need the carrier. So they've also understood the utility of the carrier as a power projection platform. And a strike carrier adds a tremendous capability. I mean, 500 miles a day you can travel and strike. You can take the battle to the enemy 500 miles away per day, which is a remarkable capability. So I think the aircraft carrier is important, as is the submarine.
Oh, well put, well put. And now, there's another question. The great naval historian, Alfred Thayer Mahan, and the man who basically articulated, give or take a little, the American strategy for the use of aircraft carriers and how the aircraft carrier can provide you a base in the sea to carry out operations. Now, if you look at India's maritime challenges, and I've always felt currently that our real area of interest is from the Gulf of Oman to the Straits of Malacca. Closer to the Straits of Malacca, we have the Andaman Nicobar Islands, which are also aircraft carriers in a way, at least some of the islets there, where you can have a base to position your aircraft with certain naval monitoring teams who can keep connected with the maritime forces. So realistically speaking, we really have to look at the Arabian Sea area where our challenges have to be met. And I go back to the question of why 3 aircraft carriers and why not 2? Because you've got a third one in the Andaman Islands.
Well, I wouldn't entirely agree that you have an aircraft carrier in the Andaman Islands. We definitely have 3 naval air bases there and 1 Air Force air base as well. And indeed, they provide us extended ranges from where to operate. But again, as Commodore A.J. Singh brought out, they are stationary. So anything that is stationary is more vulnerable than something that is moving 500 miles a day. So that's the first thing. Secondly, because they are stationary, the radius of operation from there is also fixed. We know it, the adversary also will know that. So therefore, while island territories provide a great advantage, and we are very fortunate to have island territories on both our seaboards, firstly, they do not really replace an aircraft carrier. Secondly, the fact of the matter is that as far as Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal is concerned, in the maritime world, the wars are a movable feast, if I can put it that way. They are not limited to a particular geographical sector. And therefore, threats really are mobile. They can start in the Pacific and come through the Strait of Malacca or any other strait into the
As the
Indian Ocean.
Chinese would.
That's right. Or indeed, they can come south of the Cape of Good Hope or through the Suez Canal. So in the sense, the maritime theatre of operations is really the Indian Ocean. It's not really, that might be a sub-theatre of operations at sometimes in case of a war. But I think to look at it in that manner is not really correct. So we need to really look at the entire Indian Ocean as an area where our interests lie, because we deal with countries across the oceans, all of them, from South Africa to Australia, beyond to the USA, to Europe, etc. So therefore, 3 aircraft carriers has been a concept that was actually first enunciated in 1948 in the first naval plan paper. It is a very old concept, it's not new. And
like the 42 squadrons of the Air Force.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And really that stemmed from the requirement that you would have one carrier always in refit in terms of maintenance. and so there would be 2 available at any time. And just to have one, firstly, is in terms of military parlance, is bad planning. You need to have a backup.
No reserves, no.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
anyway, I think you've made your point and you've cleared my doubts. And thank you very much to both of you for expounding on a subject which we don't get much clarity on. And let's hope this discussion will clear the air amongst the policymakers that we need to take decisions, and very quickly so. Until then, thanks for being on the show and thanks for watching. Goodbye.